My parents texted me, "You're not our priority right now," during my own birthday dinner celebration. I'm Patricia, 35 years old, and I've been secretly paying my parents' mortgage for 3 years while they lived their retirement dreams, completely unaware of my financial sacrifice. What they didn't know was that every month, $2,800 disappeared from my account to keep their dream house afloat. That text wasn't just hurtful, it was about to cost them everything they thought they owned. By morning, they'd have 42 missed calls and a lesson they'd never forget about priorities. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about one terrible text message. It's about years of being the invisible foundation holding up everyone else's dreams while my own crumbled beneath their weight. 3 years ago, I got the call that changed everything. Mom's voice was shaking as she explained how Dad's business had failed, how they were behind on the mortgage, how they might lose the house they'd worked their whole lives for, the house where I'd grown up, where every Christmas morning had unfolded, where my childhood memories lived in every corner. "We don't know what we're going to do, honey," she'd whispered into the phone. "We might have to sell everything." I remember sitting in my small downtown apartment that night, looking at my bank account. I had been saving for a down payment on my own house, something I'd been working toward for years. But family comes first, right? That's what I'd been taught my entire life. Family takes care of family. So I called them back and made the offer that would define the next 3 years of my life. I would take over their mortgage payments, temporarily, of course, just until Dad got back on his feet, just until things stabilized. They cried with relief, thanked me over and over, promised they'd pay me back as soon as possible. The house was beautiful, a sprawling suburban paradise with 4 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a backyard that looked like something from a magazine. Everything I'd dreamed of having someday, everything I was now paying for while living in my cramped 1-bedroom apartment 20 miles away. But it felt good at first, noble even. I was the responsible one, the one who could solve problems, the one they could count on. When they posted pictures of their gorgeous backyard barbecues on social media, I felt proud knowing I was making those moments possible. When they talked about how grateful they were to keep their home, I smiled and nodded, keeping the secret of my sacrifice locked away. The monthly payment of $2,147 hit my account like clockwork. Every first of the month, I watched nearly $3,000 disappear from my savings, my dreams of home ownership fading a little more each time. But they needed me. They depended on me. And isn't that what love is supposed to look like? I started picking up extra freelance work to cover the gap in my budget. Date nights became movie nights at home. Vacations became staycations. Shopping trips became careful calculations of every dollar. My friends started asking why I never seemed to have money anymore, why I'd always declined their invitations to nicer restaurants or weekend getaways. Just being careful with money, I'd say, never mentioning that careful meant choosing between paying for my parents' mortgage or having a social life. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad seemed to be thriving. Their social media was full of pictures from wine tastings, weekend trips to the mountains, dinner dates at restaurants I couldn't afford to visit anymore. Dad had found some consulting work, nothing steady, but enough to maintain their lifestyle. Mom had joined a book club and started taking pottery classes. They looked happy, carefree, living the retirement they'd always dreamed of. And I was happy for them. Really, I was. Even when it meant eating ramen for dinner 3 nights in a row. Even when it meant driving my car for an extra year because I couldn't afford the repair it desperately needed. Even when it meant turning down the promotion that would have required relocation because I couldn't risk disrupting the steady income that kept their house secure. The signs were there, though. The little cracks that should have warned me what was coming. Like when I mentioned I was thinking about looking for a new apartment, something a little bigger, and Dad immediately launched into a story about how expensive everything was getting, how they were barely scraping by, even with his consulting income. The implication was clear. Don't you dare stop those payments. Or when I suggested we all have dinner together for my birthday, and Mom responded with a long sigh about how busy they were, how many social commitments they had, how hard it was to find time for family dinners anymore, as if family dinners were just another item on their overcrowded social calendar, or the way conversations with them always seemed to circle back to money, how expensive their property taxes were, how much their insurance had gone up, how costly it was to maintain such a large house. Never a direct ask for more money, but always a reminder of how much they needed what I was already giving. I started to feel less like a daughter and more like a service provider. Our conversations became transactional. They'd call to update me on house repairs that needed to be done, utility bills that had increased, or neighborhood improvements that were raising their property values, always framed as information I needed to know, never acknowledging that I was the one making it all possible. When I tried to bring up the idea of them taking back some of the financial responsibility, the conversation would shift quickly. Dad would mention how precarious his consulting work was, how clients could disappear at any moment. Mom would bring up their age, how hard it would be to find new work if something happened to Dad's current situation. "We're so grateful for what you're doing," they'd always say. "We know it's temporary. We know you understand how hard this is for us." But what about how hard it was for me? What about my dreams, my plans, my life that had been put on hold to fund theirs? Those questions felt selfish even in my own mind. Good daughters don't keep score. Good daughters don't make their parents feel guilty for needing help. Good daughters sacrifice quietly and gratefully. So I kept quiet. I kept paying. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Even as months turned into years and their dependency on my financial support seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker. The balance in my savings account dropped to almost nothing. The down payment fund I'd spent years building was gone. The life I'd been working toward felt further away than ever, but at least my parents were happy. At least their dreams were secure. At least someone in the family was living the life they wanted. I told myself their happiness was worth my sacrifice. I told myself family meant putting others first. I told myself that someday, when their situation improved, they'd remember everything I'd done and find a way to make it right. I was wrong about so many things. The transition from grateful dependence to entitled expectation happened so gradually I almost didn't notice it. The thank you calls became less frequent. The updates about Dad's job search stopped coming altogether. The promises to pay me back as soon as things turned around faded into silence. Instead, I started getting different kinds of calls. Complaints about how long it was taking the mortgage company to process the payment each month. Requests to pay bills earlier in the month because they had social events planned and wanted to make sure everything was covered. Suggestions that I might want to consider increasing the amount I was sending to cover some of the property maintenance costs. "After all," Mom said during one particularly frustrating conversation, "you'll inherit this house someday. You're really investing in your own future." My own future. As if the 35-year-old woman living in a one-bedroom apartment and eating cereal for dinner was somehow benefiting from funding their suburban paradise. The breaking point started building months before my birthday. I'd been hinting more and more directly that I needed to start planning for my own financial future. I'd mentioned wanting to save for a house again, maybe start dating seriously, think about the next chapter of my life. Each time, the response was the same blend of guilt and manipulation that had kept me trapped for 3 years. "We understand you want your own life," Dad would say, "but you know we can't manage without your help right now." "We're not getting any younger," Mom would add. "We can't just start over financially at our age." "Family takes care of family," they'd both say, the phrase that had become both my motto and my prison. But something was shifting inside me. Maybe it was watching my friends buy houses, get married, start families, build the lives they wanted while I remained frozen in place. Maybe it was the growing resentment that bubbled up every time I saw their social media posts from expensive restaurants and weekend trips. Maybe it was just the slow, crushing realization that I had become completely invisible in my own life. I started planning my birthday celebration weeks in advance. Nothing elaborate, just dinner at a nice restaurant, the 3 of us together, a chance to feel like a family instead of a financial arrangement. I made reservations at Romano's, the Italian place where we'd celebrated my high school graduation, my college acceptance, every major milestone of my early life. "I'd really love to spend my birthday with you both," I told them when I called with the invitation. "It's been too long since we've had a real celebration together." "Of course, sweetheart," Mom said immediately. We wouldn't miss it. Just the three of us, Dad added, like old times. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about something. I bought a new dress, made an appointment to get my hair done, even treated myself to a manicure despite my tight budget. This was going to be the evening that reminded us all why family mattered, why the sacrifices were worth it, why love was supposed to be about more than money. I arrived at Romano's 15 minutes early, wanting to make sure everything was perfect. The hostess seated me at a table for three by the window, the same spot where we'd sat for my graduation dinner all those years ago. I ordered a glass of wine and checked my phone for messages. 6:30 came and went. Then 6:45. At 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Running a little late, honey. Traffic is terrible. Be there soon." I smiled and ordered another glass of wine. Traffic happens. They were coming. 7:30. Another text. "So sorry. Dad's work call is running over. Give us another 20 minutes. The waiter asked if I wanted to order appetizers. I told him we were still waiting for the rest of our party, trying to ignore the sympathetic look in his eyes. 8 o'clock. Radio silence. 8:15. I called Mom's phone. It went straight to voicemail. 8:30. I called Dad. Same thing. 8:45. I was the only person left in the restaurant still sitting at a table for three, nursing my third glass of wine and trying not to cry in public. And then, at exactly 9 o'clock, as I was signaling the waiter for the check and preparing to leave, my phone buzzed with the text that would change everything. "Patricia, we're so sorry about tonight. Something important came up with the Hendersons. You remember Bob had that health scare last month? They really needed us tonight. You understand, right? You're not our priority right now, but we'll make it up to you soon. Love you." Mom and Dad. I read it 3 times before the words really sank in. You're not our priority right now. Not, we're sorry we missed your birthday. Not, we know how disappointed you must be. Not, we'll reschedule immediately and make this right. You're not our priority right now. The daughter who had sacrificed 3 years of her life, $100,000 of her savings, and every dream she'd ever had for her own future was not their priority. But Bob Henderson's undefined health scare that required both of them to abandon their daughter on her birthday, that was a priority. I sat in that restaurant staring at the text message, feeling something crack open inside my chest. Not break, that would come later. This was different. This was the sound of 3 years of willful blindness finally giving way to perfect, terrible clarity. The waiter appeared beside my table with the check. 1 glass of wine, 1 appetizer I'd ordered out of embarrassment, 1 slice of birthday cake I'd been too upset to eat. "Everything all right, miss?" he asked gently. I looked up at him, this stranger who had shown me more consideration in 3 hours than my own parents had shown me in 3 years, and I started to laugh. Not happy laughter, the kind of laughter that comes when you realize you've been the punchline to a joke you didn't even know was being told. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "everything is perfect." I opened my notes app and started typing. "Mom and Dad, you texted me that I'm not your priority right now. Message received loud and clear. Then don't expect me to be yours. The mortgage payment that was due today? Not happening. The 3 years of payments I've made while you lived your dream retirement? Consider them a gift, but this ATM is officially closed. Since Bob Henderson's health scare is more important than your daughter's birthday, maybe he can help you figure out how to keep your house. Have a wonderful evening. Patricia." I read it twice, made a small edit, and hit send. Then I paid my check, left Romano's, and drove home to my small apartment, where I opened my laptop and immediately logged into my bank's website. The scheduled mortgage payment for tomorrow morning was right there in my pending transactions. I clicked cancel. For the first time in 3 years, I was going to keep my money in my account. For the first time in 3 years, their problems were going to be their problems. For the first time in 3 years, I was going to choose myself. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat down on my second-hand couch in my cramped living room, and waited to see how long it would take them to realize what they'd lost. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was worried about what I'd done. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. The knot in my stomach that had been there for 3 years was finally gone. No, I stayed awake because I was finally thinking clearly, and I had a lot of thinking to catch up on. I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. For 3 years, I'd been operating on emotion: guilt, love, obligation, fear. Tonight, I was going to operate on facts. The mortgage payment I'd just canceled, $2,147. Multiply that by 36 months, and I'd given them $102,492, over $100,000. Money that could have bought me a house, funded my retirement, paid for graduate school, or simply given me the financial security to take risks in my career. But it wasn't just the money. I opened my old calendars and started making a list of everything I'd given up. The promotion in Seattle that I'd turned down because I couldn't risk interrupting my income stream. The relationship with Marcus that had fizzled out because I could never afford to go anywhere or do anything. The graduate program I'd deferred and then abandoned entirely because I couldn't afford the tuition. I'd put my entire life on hold to fund their retirement fantasies. And what had I gotten in return? A text message telling me I wasn't their priority. The clarity was brutal and liberating at the same time. I wasn't their daughter. I was their safety net. I wasn't family. I was a financial institution. They didn't love me. They needed me. And there's a world of difference between being loved and being needed. I spent the next hour researching. I wasn't just acting on impulse anymore. I was making strategic decisions. I looked up tenant rights, mortgage default timelines, and family financial abuse. Yes, that was a real thing. Adult children supporting parents who were capable of supporting themselves but chose not to. Children who were manipulated into believing that love meant financial sacrifice. I found forums full of people telling stories that sounded eerily familiar to mine. Adult children who'd given up their futures to fund their parents' presents. Sons and daughters who'd been turned into family ATMs through a careful combination of guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation. For the first time, I had a name for what had happened to me, and more importantly, I had a plan for what came next. I called my bank first thing in the morning and spoke to a financial advisor. I needed to understand exactly what canceling the mortgage payment meant, not just for them, but for me. Was I legally obligated to continue paying? Could they force me to resume payments? What were my rights in this situation? The answers were more empowering than I'd expected. Since the mortgage was in their names and I'd been making voluntary payments, I had no legal obligation to continue. I wasn't a cosigner, wasn't on the deed, had no official connection to the house at all. I'd been paying out of the goodness of my heart, and I could stop any time I wanted. You might want to document everything, the advisor suggested. Keep records of how much you've paid and why. If this becomes contentious, you'll want proof of your voluntary contributions. Contentious. That was definitely going to happen. I spent the rest of the morning gathering documentation, bank statements, transfer records, emails about the mortgage arrangement. I created a folder on my computer called Financial Independence and saved everything there. If they wanted to make this ugly, I'd be ready. My phone had been ominously quiet all morning. No texts, no calls, no acknowledgement of my message from the night before. Either they hadn't seen it yet or they were planning their response. I was betting on the latter. Around noon, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went out for a nice lunch. Not because I was celebrating, not yet, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to spend money on myself without guilt. I chose a little bistro downtown, ordered the salmon special, and ate slowly while I watched people walk by outside. For 3 years, every dollar I spent on myself had felt like theft. Money that should have gone to their mortgage, their security, their comfort. Now, as I sat there eating a meal that cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. I felt free. My phone rang just as I was finishing dessert. Mom's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Dad this time. Voicemail again. The third call came from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. Patricia? Mom's voice calling from someone else's phone. Honey, we need to talk. Do we? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Of course we do. There seems to be some confusion about the mortgage payment. The bank called us this morning saying it was declined. There's no confusion, Mom. I canceled it. A long pause. Then, honey, you can't just cancel the mortgage payment. We depend on that money. I noticed. That's exactly the problem. Patricia, I don't understand what you're upset about. We explained about last night. Bob was having a health emergency and Bob Henderson's health emergency, I interrupted, required both of you to abandon your daughter on her birthday? What exactly was the emergency that couldn't wait until after dinner? Another pause. I could hear Dad's voice in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. It's complicated, Mom said finally. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Bob and Linda were having marital problems. They needed friends to talk to. I laughed, and not nicely. Marriage counseling was more important than your daughter's birthday dinner? Patricia, you're being selfish. We're trying to help friends who are going through a difficult time. And I'm trying to help myself go through a difficult time. The difficult time of being treated like an ATM instead of a daughter. That's not fair. You know how grateful we are? Grateful enough to text me that I'm not your priority? Silence. We didn't mean it like that, Mom said finally. How did you mean it exactly? Because I read it as pretty clear communication about where I stand in your lives. You're our daughter. Of course you're a priority. Really? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you took an interest in my life that didn't involve how much money I could send you? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a payment plan? We don't. She was struggling now, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. Patricia, we can't lose this house. We're too old to start over. And I'm too young to stop living. I'm 35 years old, Mom. I don't own a house. I don't have a retirement fund. I don't have a relationship or kids or any of the things people my age are supposed to have because I've spent 3 years funding your lifestyle. We never asked you to sacrifice your life for us. You just demanded that I sacrifice my money. What did you think that money represented? Where did you think it was coming from? Did you imagine I had some endless trust fund you were tapping into? We hoped, things would get better for us, and we'd be able to pay you back. When? Dad hasn't been seriously job hunting in over a year. You're both living like you're retired. When exactly were you planning to pay me back? No answer. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. I'm not making any more mortgage payments. I'm not covering any more of your bills. I'm not funding your retirement anymore. You have until the end of the month to figure out how you're going to handle your own financial responsibilities. Patricia, please. You can't just abandon us like this. Like you abandoned me last night? Like you've been abandoning me emotionally for 3 years while you took my money? That's different. We're your parents. And I'm your daughter. That should mean something more than being your personal bank. I hung up. The phone started ringing immediately, but I turned it off. I wasn't going to be manipulated into another 3-hour conversation designed to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. I wasn't going to be talked into resuming payments because they'd found new ways to make me feel responsible for their choices. I was done being managed, but I wasn't done being strategic. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the library, researching everything I could about family financial manipulation, adult children setting boundaries with parents, and the legal implications of stopping voluntary financial support. I printed out articles about financial abuse, codependency, and healthy family relationships. If they wanted to have a conversation about this, we were going to have it with facts, not just feelings. I also started looking at apartments, real apartments, with enough space for a dining table and maybe even a home office. Places I could afford now that I wasn't sending $3,000 a month to support someone else's dreams. For the first time in years, I started thinking about what I actually wanted my life to look like. The calls started again that evening. I'd turned my phone back on to order dinner, and immediately it began buzzing with missed call notifications. 17 missed calls in 3 hours. I scrolled through them. Mom, Dad, unknown number, Mom, Dad, unknown number again. They were calling from other people's phones now, trying to get around my screening. I listened to a few of the voicemails. The progression was predictable. Confusion, hurt, anger, desperation. guilt tripping, bargaining, more anger, more guilt tripping. Patricia, you're destroying our lives over one misunderstanding. We raised you better than this. Family doesn't abandon family. We don't understand how you could be so cruel. Please call us back. We can work this out. Your father is beside himself. You're killing him with this stress. And finally, from Dad, if you don't call us back tonight, we're coming over to your apartment. I saved that voicemail. If this got ugly, when this got ugly, I'd want documentation of their escalating behavior. I also called my landlord and asked about the building's security policies. Could people get buzzed up without tenant permission? Were there cameras in the lobby? I wasn't being paranoid. I was being careful. Then I called my friend Sarah, the only person in my life who knew the whole story about my financial arrangement with my parents. I did it, I told her. I stopped the payments. About damn time, she said immediately. How are you feeling? Terrified, exhilarated, guilty, free, all at the same time. The guilt will fade. The freedom is permanent. What happened? I told her about the birthday dinner, about the text message, about my decision to cancel the mortgage payment. They texted you that you weren't their priority? Sarah's voice was sharp with anger. On your birthday? After you've been funding their entire lifestyle for 3 years? That's what finally did it. I think I could have forgiven missing dinner, but that text, it was like they couldn't even pretend to care about my feelings anymore. Because they don't. Patricia, they haven't cared about your feelings for years. They've been using you, and you finally stood up for yourself. They're calling it abandonment. Of course they are. That's what manipulators do when their victims start setting boundaries. They make the victim feel guilty for protecting themselves. What if I really am abandoning them? What if they lose the house? Then they lose the house. That's what happens when adults can't pay their bills. They face consequences. But they're my parents. And you're their daughter. Did that stop them from treating you like a business transaction? I knew she was right, but knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. What if they really can't survive without my help? Patricia, your dad was running a business 3 years ago. Your mom has a college degree. They're not helpless. They're entitled. There's a difference. I just keep thinking about them losing everything. What about you losing everything? You've already lost 3 years of your life, $100,000, and countless opportunities. How much more are you supposed to lose before you're allowed to put yourself first? She was right. I knew she was right. But 3 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I'm scared they'll never forgive me. Would that really be such a bad thing? Patricia, when was the last time you enjoyed spending time with them? When was the last time you looked forward to a phone call from your parents instead of dreading it? I couldn't remember. I think, Sarah continued gently, you're not afraid of losing their love. You're afraid of admitting that you lost it a long time ago, and you've been paying for the illusion of it ever since. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to send, just to process. I wrote down everything I'd been thinking and feeling for 3 years, but had never been able to say. All the resentment, all the hurt, all the dreams I'd given up, all the ways I'd made myself smaller to accommodate their needs. It was 12 pages long when I finished. Reading it back, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry about the disrespect. I was angry about being taken for granted, about being treated as if my feelings didn't matter, about being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was. The money was just the symbol. The real theft was of my agency, my dignity, my right to live my own life, and I was taking it all back. The next morning, I woke up to 42 missed calls and 37 text messages. They'd clearly spent the night in crisis mode, calling everyone they knew, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. I scrolled through the messages. Most were variations on the same themes: guilt, anger, desperation, attempts at bargaining. But there were a few that revealed something interesting. We called your cousin Jenny and told her what you're doing to us. She's appalled. Uncle Mike says you've lost your mind and we should cut you off completely. We're telling everyone what kind of daughter you really are. They were trying to isolate me, turn the extended family against me, make me the villain in their story. It was a calculated move. and it told me everything I needed to know about how they really saw this situation. They weren't treating this as a family problem to be solved together. They were treating it as a war to be won. Fine, I could fight a war. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email. Not to them, to the extended family they were trying to poison against me. Cousin Jenny, Uncle Mike, Aunt Carol, everyone on their contact list who might be hearing their version of events. I kept it factual, documented, and calm. I attached bank statements showing the $102,192 I'd transferred to them over 3 years. I attached screenshots of my budget showing how I'd been living to accommodate their financial needs. I attached photos of their social media posts showing the lifestyle they'd been living while I funded it. And I attached the screenshot of the text message they'd sent me on my birthday. I didn't ask for anyone to take sides. I didn't ask for sympathy. I just laid out the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. Before I hit send, I called my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, who I'd always been close to. "Patricia," she answered warmly. "Your mother called me last night. She's very upset." "I bet she is. What did she tell you?" "She said you'd stopped helping them with their mortgage and they might lose their house. She said she didn't understand why you were being so cruel." "Did she mention why I stopped helping?" A pause. "She said you had some kind of fight, but she wasn't clear on the details." I told her the whole story, the 3 years of payments, the sacrifices I'd made, the way they'd started taking the money for granted, and finally, the birthday dinner that never happened and the text message that ended everything. When I finished, Aunt Carol was quiet for a long moment. "Patricia," she said finally, "I had no idea you'd been supporting them financially. Your mother made it sound like you'd just stopped helping out of nowhere. I've been paying their mortgage for 3 years, Carol. Over $100,000. $100,000? She sounded shocked. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were taking advantage of you like that." "They're telling everyone I'm abandoning them." "You're not abandoning them. You're protecting yourself. There's a difference." Relief flooded through me. At least one person in the family understood. "I'm going to send an email to everyone explaining what really happened. I don't want you or anyone else making decisions based on incomplete information." "That's probably wise. Patricia, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. What they did to you wasn't okay." After I hung up with Carol, I hit send on the email. Then I waited. The response was swift and revealing. Some family members called to offer support and express shock at how I'd been treated. Others remained silent, probably not wanting to get involved in family drama. A few sent angry messages defending my parents and accusing me of airing dirty laundry. But the most telling response came from my parents themselves. Instead of calling me directly, they sent a mass email to the entire family, including me. "We are heartbroken by Patricia's decision to share private family matters with everyone. We have always been grateful for her help and never demanded anything from her. We are shocked by her characterization of our relationship and hurt that she would try to turn the family against us during our time of need. We hope she will reconsider her decision to abandon us and remember that family forgives and supports each other through difficult times." No acknowledgement of the birthday dinner, no apology for the text message, no recognition of the $100,000 I'd given them or the sacrifices I'd made. Just more manipulation, more attempts to make themselves the victims and me the villain. It was perfect, actually, because it showed everyone exactly who they really were. The responses to their email were less supportive than they'd probably hoped. Several family members called them out publicly for not acknowledging my financial contributions. Others pointed out that asking for forgiveness typically requires offering an apology first. My cousin Jenny, who they'd claimed was appalled by my behavior, sent me a private message. "I had no idea they were taking so much money from you. Mom told me the whole story after your email. You did the right thing." That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered it expecting another family member. "Patricia Wilson?" The voice was professional, unfamiliar. "Yes? This is David Chen from Mortgage Solutions Plus. I'm calling regarding your parents' account. We understand there may have been some changes to their payment arrangement." I paused, processing. Their mortgage company was calling me directly. They must have given them my number at some point, probably listed me as a backup contact or co-payer. I'm not on the mortgage, I said carefully. I have no legal obligation to their account. Of course not, but we understand you've been assisting with payments in the past, and we wanted to reach out directly to see if we could work out a solution. There's no solution to work out. I will no longer be making payments on their mortgage. I understand. However, the account is now 30 days behind, and we wanted to explore all options before beginning the foreclosure process. Foreclosure process? I felt a chill. If the account remains delinquent for 90 days, we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. 90 days. They had 90 days to figure out how to save their house. That's between you and the account holders, I said. I'm not responsible for their financial obligations. Of course not. We just wanted to make sure you were aware of the timeline. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone. 90 days. In 90 days, if my parents couldn't come up with a solution, they'd lose the house. The house where I'd grown up, the house full of memories, the house that represented everything they'd worked for their entire lives. The house I'd been paying for while they lived like celebrities. I called Sarah again. They have 90 days, I told her. And then? Foreclosure. How do you feel about that? I thought about it honestly. Scared, guilty, but also relieved? If they lose the house, this whole dynamic finally ends. They can't guilt me about payments anymore because there won't be any payments to make. They'll find other ways to guilt you. Maybe. But at least I'll know I didn't sacrifice my entire future for nothing. Patricia, you need to stay strong. This is the hardest part. They're going to pull out every manipulation tactic they have. They're going to try to make you feel responsible for their consequences. What if I am responsible? You're not. You didn't force them to become dependent on your money. You didn't make them stop taking care of their own finances. You didn't send yourself that text message on your birthday. They created the situation through their choices, and now they have to deal with the results. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I started making plans for my future. Real plans, based on what I wanted instead of what other people needed from me. I looked at apartments I could actually afford, jobs that interested me instead of just jobs that paid well, graduate programs I'd abandoned but could maybe restart. I calculated how quickly I could rebuild my savings without the mortgage payment draining my account every month. For the first time in years, my future looked bright. My phone rang. Mom's name on the screen. This time I answered. Hi, Mom. Patricia. Her voice was cold, controlled. We need to discuss this situation like adults. I'm listening. This has gone far enough. You've made your point, and we understand you're upset about the birthday dinner. But you can't destroy our lives over one misunderstanding. Mom, this isn't about one dinner. This is about 3 years of being treated like a financial resource instead of a family member. That's not true. We love you. Do you? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you asked about my job, my friends, my hopes for the future? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about money? Silence. We can work this out, she said finally. We'll pay you back. We'll set up a payment plan. With what money? Dad's consulting income that barely covers your social calendar? We'll figure it out. We'll get jobs if we have to. You'll get jobs if you have to? Mom, most people don't treat employment as a last resort. Most people work because that's how adults pay their bills. We're not most people. We're your parents. We raised you. We sacrificed for you, and now we need your help. You sacrificed for me when I was a child because that's what parents do. I'm not a child anymore, and my entire adult life shouldn't be about paying you back for doing your job as parents. So this is how you repay us? By abandoning us when we need you most? This is how I save myself from being financially abused for the rest of your lives. Financial abuse? Her voice rose. How dare you accuse us of abuse? We never forced you to help us. You didn't have to force me. You just had to make me feel guilty every time I suggested I might want to stop. You just had to remind me constantly how much you needed the money while posting pictures of your expensive dinners on Facebook. You just had to treat my financial support as an entitlement while treating my emotional needs as an inconvenience. We're going to lose everything. No, you're going to lose the house you couldn't afford without my subsidies. Everything else, Your health, your relationship, your ability to work and support yourselves, that's all still there. Patricia, please, we're begging you. And there it was. The word that should have broken my heart, but instead just made me tired. Begging. After 3 years of taking my money for granted, after missing my birthday for someone else's marriage problems, after texting me that I wasn't their priority, after trying to turn the family against me, now they were begging. I'm not changing my mind, Mom. Then you're not the daughter we raised? You're right. The daughter you raised would have kept paying your mortgage until she was bankrupt and alone. The daughter you raised would have sacrificed her entire life to avoid disappointing you. I'm not her anymore. We'll never forgive you for this. I know, and I'm finally okay with that. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I opened my laptop and started looking at houses. Real houses in my price range that I could buy with the money I was no longer sending them. It was time to start building my own life. For the next 2 months, I lived in a strange bubble of peace and purpose. I'd blocked my parents' numbers, filtered their emails to a folder I checked once a week, and focused entirely on rebuilding my life. I applied for the graduate program I'd abandoned 3 years earlier and was accepted for the spring semester. I put an offer on a small but beautiful townhouse across town and had it accepted. I even started dating again, something I'd given up entirely when every spare dollar was going to my parents' mortgage. The weekly emails from my parents followed a predictable pattern. Week 1, anger and accusations. Week 2, guilt and manipulation. Week 3, bargaining and promises. Week 4, desperation and threats. Then back to anger again. I read them with a detachment that surprised me. These people who had once been able to control my emotions with a single disappointed sigh now seemed like strangers having a temper tantrum I couldn't quite understand. The emails from other family members were more interesting. About half supported my decision once they understood the full situation. The other half either stayed neutral or quietly sided with my parents. But even those who disagreed with me seemed to understand why I'd done it. Nobody except my parents thought I was evil for stopping the payments. In the 8th week, the emails from my parents stopped completely. I knew what that meant. I called the mortgage company to confirm. The property has entered foreclosure proceedings, David Chin told me. The homeowners have 90 days to vacate or bring the account current. How much would it take to bring the account current? With late fees and penalties, approximately $14,000. $14,000. I had that much in my checking account, money that would have been long gone if I'd still been making their payments. I could save them. I could swoop in at the last minute, pay the arrears, and everything could go back to the way it was. The old Patricia would have done exactly that. The new Patricia hung up the phone and went house hunting. 3 days later, I got a call from Aunt Carol. "They're moving in with us," she said without preamble. "What?" "Your parents. They can't save the house and they have nowhere else to go. Mike and I talked about it, and we can't let them be homeless." I felt a complicated mix of relief and guilt. Relief that they weren't going to be on the street. Guilt that someone else was having to clean up the mess I'd walked away from. "Carol, I'm sorry you're being put in this position." "Don't be. This isn't your fault, Patricia. They're adults who made poor financial decisions and now they're facing the consequences. Mike and I can afford to help them and we're choosing to do it temporarily while they get back on their feet." Temporarily? Very temporarily. 6 months max. They're going to get jobs, save money, and find their own place. We're not enabling them the way— She paused. "The way I did?" I wasn't going to say that. But it's true. I enabled them for 3 years. You loved them. There's a difference. Is there? Because the result was the same. They became completely dependent on money they hadn't earned and had no right to expect. The difference is that you're learning from it. You set boundaries, you protected yourself, and you're building your own life. That takes courage. After I hung up with Carol, I sat in my apartment that would soon be vacated for my new house, and tried to process how I felt. Relieved, guilty, sad, free, proud, ashamed. All at the same time. I'd gotten what I wanted. They could no longer guilt me about mortgage payments because there was no mortgage to pay. They could no longer take my money for granted because I was no longer giving them access to it. They could no longer treat me like a financial resource because I'd removed myself from that role entirely. But I'd also lost something I hadn't expected to lose: the illusion that my parents loved me unconditionally. The truth was, their love had been very conditional. Conditional on my financial support, conditional on my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for theirs, conditional on my acceptance of being treated as less important than their social calendar. When I'd stopped meeting those conditions, the love had stopped too. It hurt, but it was also clarifying. Better to know the truth than to keep living a lie. 2 weeks later, I closed on my house. It was small, but perfect. 2 bedrooms, a little garden, a mortgage I could afford on my own income. As I signed the papers, I thought about how different my life might have been if I'd bought this house 3 years ago instead of funding my parents' lifestyle. But I also thought about how different I was now than I'd been 3 years ago. The woman who'd signed up to pay my parents' mortgage had been eager to please, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice anything to maintain relationships. The woman signing papers on her own house was strong, independent, clear about her boundaries, and comfortable with difficult decisions. Maybe the sacrifice had been worth it, not because it helped them, but because it taught me who I really was underneath all the people-pleasing. On moving day, I got one final email from my parents. "We hope you're happy with what you've done. We hope your new house brings you the satisfaction you couldn't find in helping your family. We hope you never need the kind of help you refused to give us. We won't be contacting you again." I read it twice, then deleted it. Then I unpacked my boxes in my beautiful new house, made dinner in my spacious kitchen, and slept peacefully in my own bedroom for the first time in 3 years. I was home.